Hi, this is Corey Yarbrough, Executive Director of the Hispanic Black Gay Coalition, here to share another interview from our mayoral video series. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to interview candidate Dan Conley. Dan Conley is currently the District Attorney for Suffolk County. Check out our interview where we discuss HIV infection rates, the criminal justice system, education, and race relations in Boston. District Attorney Conley, thank you so much for inviting me to your campaign office.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thank you for coming.
Great. So I want to just go ahead and hop into the questions.
Sure.
You recently joined us for our Pride picnic that was hosted by Hughes, HBGC's Women Council. So tell me a little bit about why you decided to join us for the picnic and why our community is so important to you.
Well, I was invited by a friend of mine, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to meet a more younger, more diverse group of individuals. I had been to a number of events earlier that day, and it was a great opportunity for me to kind of unwind in that afternoon. It was a relaxed setting, some music, there was some artistic things going on there, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to connect, one-on-one with a very diverse group of young people in our city who are adding so much to the vibrancy of our community. So I was happy to be there.
Great, great. I was glad to have you there. So your website goes into great detail as far as what you've done for LGBT people, what you've done for people of color, and what you plan to do as mayor. But as often most people don't do, we don't talk about the intersection of those two communities, so LGBT people of color. So tell me a little bit more about what you feel are the needs for that community and what you will do as mayor to support that community.
Sure. So, well, generally on LGBTQ issues, I think I have a demonstrated record of real acceptance, openness, and support for the community. This goes back many, many years. I was elected to first office in 1993. And for a young person like yourself, you may not realize that back 20 years ago, a controversial issue was whether or not domestic partners should receive health and employment benefits, at work, share it with their partner. And this was an issue that was quite controversial in Boston at the time. Probably the most important and meaningful vote I took as a young political figure. And I supported the extension of those benefits. And so from that point on, in my public life, I've been very supportive of these issues. I took a lot of political hits for that. I represented a community that was largely conservative and Catholic, and they were not pleased with that vote. But to me, it was always a social justice, human rights issue. I met with gay men, I met with advocacy groups here in the district that I represented, and this was actually here where we are in Jamaica Plain, right on the northern fringe, if you will, or frontier of my district, and spent some time here in this community, which was home to a number of gay and lesbian couples, and really listened to their stories and the powerful stories that they told me about their struggles to fit in, to be accepted in our city. And that left a very lasting impression on me. So ever since, I've been very strongly supportive of the LGBTQ community and advancing issues like fairness, whether it be health benefits, marriage equality, transgender issues. I'm very strong in those issues.
Great. And as you speak to transgender issues, as you may know, our State House is currently debating a public accommodation bill related to extending more protections to the transgender community when they face discrimination in public settings. Do you personally support the bill, or what additional protections do you feel Boston needs for the transgender community?
Well, I've partnered up with the transgender community, especially around the issue of domestic violence. As you know, I'm currently the district attorney. And domestic violence is an issue that transcends gender, that transcends sexual orientation. And with respect to domestic violence, I've been very active with the Gay Men's Domestic Violence Project and other organizations, one of which is Network the Red, which is advocates quite vigorously for transgender issues as well. And in partnering up with them, we've accomplished a lot in reducing and addressing issues of domestic violence in that community. With respect to the transgender bill, I have supported the bill from day one and have actually offered testimony in support of the bill.
Great, great. Let's talk about domestic violence, because actually the Network Lorette is one of our strongest partners, and they are in an initiative with us called TODOS, which is all about expanding access to domestic violence services, particularly for the Black and Latino LGBT community. And so, you know, as district attorney, I think you would be interested in a report that this collaborative actually recently did. And when we asked the question, what will prevent you from seeking support services if you were experiencing partner abuse in your relationship, fear and distrust of law enforcement actually received 51% of that vote. So I'm curious just to get your reaction to that and what you, with your district attorney background as mayor, can do to help solve that fear and distrust of law enforcement.
Well, of course, I'm very disappointed about that because, you know, we certainly strive to reach out to all communities and to build trust, and that, again, transcends race, sexual orientation, neighborhood. Some communities are less trustful of law enforcement than others, so that's hard work. It's built case by case, relationship by relationship. I think the DA's office has done a very good job with that. You know, one of the initiatives that I've taken is to create what's called the Family Justice Center. And I brought in diverse groups who deal with domestic violence. Again, Network Lorette, Gay Men's Domestic Violence Project, and others, to demonstrate that it doesn't matter how you define yourself or how you define your family. Everyone is welcome in the district attorney's office for help with domestic violence services. And this is also an issue in the immigrant community, you know, especially immigrants that come from countries where there are authoritarian governments or dictatorships, so they immediately recoil, you know, at the thought of ever bringing an issue to the government, especially policing authorities. So we just spend a lot of time in the field, if you will, developing relationships one-on-one. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected mayor, I am going to be a standard bearer for inclusion and acceptance. And I believe that, you know, at the top of the organization, if that's how the leader is conducting himself or herself, that'll permeate the whole city.
Great, thank you. And, you know, tied to this conversation of law enforcement and our criminal justice system is inevitably the issue of race. So for Boston, how would you currently describe race relations?
I think, you know, race relations are good and improving. You know, at least that's my sense. You know, there's always work to be done, though. I think that work goes on and continues. You know, I feel it myself. I spend a lot of time in communities of color, and here I am, the chief law enforcement officer. And I feel, as an individual, I'm well accepted in communities of color that I visit. You know, I look at my own office, which is probably the most racially diverse public sector agency maybe in Massachusetts. I mean, I made a real commitment to that back in 2002. So in my office, we had people of you know, all diverse races and sexual orientations and ethnicities, and come to one of our events, for example, our just work events, and you'll see people who truly care about each other, and there's no, you know, boundaries in terms of those distinctions that are superficial. We're all part of the district attorney's office, and I see that in other communities. People truly care about each other. I think about right up the road here, the Franklin Park Golf Course. I don't know if you're a golfer. I like to play golf. Haven't played any golf this summer, though.
I'm sure. Busy man.
You want to see race relations in action in Boston? Go up there and just sit there and watch the, you know, the interaction between African American golfers, Latino golfers, and you know, white Caucasian golfers. Oftentimes playing together in mixed groups. You know, so I see it on an anecdotal level, you know, pretty well. It's all about being open. It's all about being accepting and accessible. And I've seen it in many other settings in Boston. But it's always a work in progress. We can't deny that there are sometimes, you know, divisions that are things that divide us, but we all have to work, again, one-on-one, relationship by relationship, to improve that in our city.
Something else that on your website, and you have a very detailed website, I think one of the most of all the candidates as far as clearly outlaying a platform and direction, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And one of the things listed is more alternatives to incarceration. So I'm just curious if you have specifics yet on what those alternatives may be.
Well, we already do a lot of this in the district attorney's office, as you can imagine. But in Massachusetts and in Boston, it actually is quite difficult to go to jail. I know that people probably who are out in the criminal justice system don't realize that. Oftentimes, a defendant will get will have contact with the court perhaps as many as 3 or 4 or 5 times, maybe even more, before he or she ends up incarcerated. So we give a series of sort of progressive punishments. It's kind of like, in a way, disciplining a child, where you start off with a modest punishment, working your way up to more severity. Of course, if someone commits their first offense and it's a completely egregious act of violence, that would change. But for the most part, we start with a progressive punishment system, using the tools of probation to conform and encourage conduct that's more socially acceptable. So we have this already going on in Boston. We do a lot of diversion programs, especially with young juvenile offenders. If I become mayor, this will not be so much in my area of responsibility anymore, but I certainly would promote more alternatives to incarceration. Incarceration needs to be reserved primarily for violent offenders or individuals, I believe, involved in gun and gang and drug activity. That's really at the root cause of most of the violence in our city. For lots of other types of offenders, it's better off to be involved in drug court or a mental health diversion court if they have mental health issues, or especially with juveniles, ways to address things like anger management, substance abuse, and the hope there to get people back, on the path to success rather than down that terrible path that leads to incarceration and eventually hopelessness, unemployability, and so forth.
Great, thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about HIV and health disparities. So the Boston Herald actually praised you for your support of needle exchange programs. So tell me a little bit more about why you support that and what other programs, initiatives you would support for reducing the risk, the new infections of HIV in Boston.
Sure. It's, this was an issue that was controversial because there was an ordinance, there was an actual statute on the books across Massachusetts that made possession of a hypodermic needle a crime. And, HIV transmission often occurs through the use of shared or dirty needles. And I met with the folks from AIDS Action. Now we're going back 6, 7, 8 years. I can't even remember precisely. Maybe you know the date. But after meeting with the folks from AIDS Action Committee, I certainly became persuaded that we could really drive down the rates of infection and transmission by making clean needles accessible to drug addicts. The argument on the other side is this promotes intravenous drug use and is a bad public policy. So the bill was stalled in the legislature. It was going absolutely nowhere. And the AIDS Action called on me to step forward, and if I really believed in this, to testify in favor of it. So I went to the State House and I testified in favor of the bill to allow access to clean needles. And immediately, trying to pat myself on the back, but immediately the debate shifted because legislators said, geez, if this law enforcement official can step forward and make this statement in a very public forum, in a crowded auditorium at the State House, then we can support this. And immediately, almost immediately, the law was passed. You can speak to Rebecca Haag about this if you'd like more. She's the executive director of AIDS Action. But Rebecca's been very thankful for my support on this issue, and has felt that when law enforcement, myself and also Attorney General Martha Coakley, who joined me that day, really changed things. I mean, testing is so important. As much access to that free testing is available, the better. It shouldn't be stigmatizing anybody. This is an important public health issue, and I want to drive down the rates of infection as much as humanly possible.
Great, thank you. So when we talk about jobs in education. On your website, you have a few things that you would pinpoint, such as business and universities collaborating, more job training programs, programs to support college retention. Tell me a little bit more about how these initiatives, or maybe one that I didn't read or isn't posted, will help communities of color, particularly low-income people of color who aren't in college yet, maybe don't want to go to college, can't access college now. What is your plan for those communities?
Well, as you know, as district attorney, I certainly spend most of my time in communities of color.
Mm-hmm.
And when you drill down on people who break the law, even people who are victimized, you will find that the system that failed them earliest and most frequently is the education system in Boston. Some of our minority kids, or kids of color living in our city, they live like almost within eyesight of some of the great universities, and they can't find a pathway there. I believe it's the social justice issue of our time, and that's why we need to make sure that our young kids who are living in the inner city of Boston, who are in poverty, have the same access, the same opportunity to a post-high school education. The 21st century job market is going to almost require a bachelor's degree, about 75% of the jobs. We know every kid's not going to go on to college, but for me, the pathway to success is going to be, and breaking the cycle of poverty and dependence in the inner city of Boston is going to be in revamping the education system. The next mayor has a chance to be a transformative figure on education. And I believe if that person has the courage and the backbone to take on entrenched interest and really address the education problem in Boston, close the achievement gap, this city is going to change in ways that are going to be incredibly dynamic and exciting, and make this really the first big city in America to accomplish closing the achievement gap. So a few things I'd make sure of. One, that every kid in our city had access to universal high-quality preschool education. That's so important. They learn not only how to be good students when they get to school, but they also learn they call it student-centered behaviors like, attention, paying attention to the teacher, conflict resolution, sharing. We all were taught when we were little kids to share, those kinds of things. Teachers have to spend so much time on that stuff when first grade starts that takes away from their education. Children who go through a high-quality preschool experience start off without an achievement gap. Kids who don't, there's already an achievement gap. So for me, if you can't afford it, for our children that can't afford it, we need to provide it. Secondly, I'd want the new school superintendent to adjust our curriculum in Boston to make sure that our students were exposed to the STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and math. These are where the jobs of the 21st century are going to be. We are already, and we will continue to grow and be a knowledge-based economy, meaning that if you want a good, high-paying job, you're going to have a bachelor's degree, and if you want a job down in the Innovation District or Downtown Crossing or in the Leather District where these young startups are coming along, you're going to need exposure to these subjects. So I want to make sure that our children are prepared for this. Even if you don't go to college, having a foundation in these subjects will give you a good blue-collar job opportunity as well. When you talk to some of the employers in Boston, there are jobs available. But our workforce who wants to work, there's a mismatch between what's available and the population that is looking for a good paying job. So for those individuals who are already out of school, high school or whatever, even college, we need to work with our universities and our employers in this city to decide, to figure out what's needed, what skills are needed, and then bring those two together to job train so that even people right now who are out of high school, out of college even, have an opportunity to participate in the knowledge-based economy of Boston. Okay,
great. So one final question before I hit what I call my lightning round, which is just some quick last comments. Yeah. I want to make sure I touch on immigration because you mentioned earlier that is something that's very real for our community when you talk about fear of law enforcement. LGBT people have an extra element there when that can be used as a form of abuse or control immigration status, and you are the grandson of immigrants. So I want to read this quote from the Boston Globe that was in February 2013, and then ask you basically a question. So the article starts by saying, federal immigration officials are deporting more immigrants in Massachusetts for civil violations than for serious crimes under a fingerprint sharing program that expanded from Boston. In Suffolk County, where the program officially launched in Boston in 2008, barely half of the 567 immigrants deported had criminal records. So I'm curious to get your position on secure communities, and in light of that as well, what support for immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, do you believe Boston should have?
In Boston, in our office, with respect to victimization, we have made it very clear that for us it makes no difference if you are documented or undocumented. So we have passed out literature, we've spread that word through agencies that serve immigrant populations, that if you are a victim of a crime, whether it be domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, embezzlement, come to the DA's office. We don't even ask those questions. You don't get reported to anybody. Our job is to serve those communities. So talk about building trust, which was part of your earlier interview. That's really how we have conducted ourselves in the DA's office. And we've given services to people who are undocumented, and everything has worked out perfectly fine.
Great. And as mayor, is there anything in addition that you would do or strive to do?
You talked about my we're all immigrants, I guess, in the United States. I'm actually of both Irish and Italian ancestry. My Italian immigrant grandparents came here in the 20th century with no language skills, with no education really to speak of. They came here looking for a better opportunity, and immigrants across all generations have added so much to our city and the vibrancy of our city. So Boston is growing, and there's opportunity here for young professionals to come here, but I'd like to think there's also opportunities for people who come from other countries who want to enjoy the prosperity here, to come and live in our city and enjoy all the benefits of it as well.
Great, great.
With it, we are bringing their unique contributions, of course, to our city as well.
Great. Okay, so to wrap things up again, just wanted to hit this quick lightning round where it's basically fill in the blank, in a few words, complete these sentences for me. The first is, a more equal and just Boston requires
greater access to a solid education that will enlighten and open doors for people.
Great. A personal hero of mine is?
My father, who worked very hard each and every day to raise 7 children, sacrificed his own personal, interests and needs for his children, and I think that's demonstrative of what we want for all parents in our city to do for their children, but just as good citizens to be willing to forego their own personal needs for the benefit of all.
Okay. An area I am looking to improve in as a leader is? That's a good one.
I think we can always improve.
Yeah.
There's always ways to improve. I think that I've demonstrated a strong level of executive management experience that none of the other candidates really have. I lead a large, complex public organization. But, just constantly being out there and asking for advice and counsel and wisdom. I'm not somebody who thinks he has all the answers, but at the same time, spend some more time talking to people across the city for their ideas, to learn more about their desires, their ideas, their needs.
Great, thanks. And last, to the Black and Latino LGBT community, I pledge.
You'll have a friend in me as district attorney. As mayor of Boston, you already have one as district attorney. I've demonstrated that, and you'll have my support as mayor.
Great, thank you so much.
Right.
Any final words you want to say, or how we can plug into your campaign?
Well, you can go on. You've referenced my website a few times now. That's danconley4mayor.com. Please go on the website. It has a very comprehensive plan to take Boston from a very good city to a great city. And it depends on all of the support and the buy-in from all communities, including the including the LGBTQ community, and I'd love to have your support. There's ways to volunteer, so please join our campaign.
Great. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.